Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. Today I have a fun project for you. I'm going to show you how I go from a blank coin like this and completely cut it out on my Tian fiber laser. That's the laser we're going to be using for this project and end up with beautiful jewelry like this. Look at the level of detail in this jewelry. Imagine what you can create. We're going to go from an STL 3D file that you can download, and I'll give you sources for that. We're going to take that file, we're going to put it into Blender, and I'm going to show you how to make a perfect depth map so you can carve this out. And then we'll go into LightBurn, and I will show you all the settings that I use. Let's get into it. The first step is to download an STL or OBJ file. I recommend either MakerWorld or Printables. You can use the search function to find the model that you would like to use in your project. I'm going to use a horse for this particular demonstration. As you can see here, this is not the one that I'm going to choose, but when you hit the download, you will have the option to choose the STL, and that's what you want. Do not choose a 3MF file, as this has more data than we need. The download that I am going to actually use for this demonstration is this stylized horse head here. So again, in MakerWorld, you can see that we have the choice to download the horse STL. So go ahead and then download that and save it to a location that you can find later. The next step is to download Blender. Here is the URL to download this free software. Blender is a 3D sculpting program, and it is what we are going to use to create the depth maps. Once you have Blender downloaded and installed, you'll open up the program and you'll be presented with this screen here. You've got a couple of basic items here. You're going to have this cube to start with. You've got a camera icon, and then you have a light source. I'm going to give you a very brief introduction to Blender for navigation. Here you have the gizmo. This will allow you to rotate the viewport. So up, down, left, right, all that kind of stuff. You do have to click your left mouse button and hold it down to change your view. Next, you have the magnifying glass here. Again, if you click your left mouse button and then move the cursor up or move your mouse up and down, you'll be able to zoom in and out. Now we have the hand icon. Again, left click and hold, and then just moving the mouse will allow you to kind of pan around. Those are your basic navigation tools. Now, since we are primarily interested in working with smaller items like coins, and for this example, we're going to be using a 40mm coin blank, the first thing that we need to do in Blender is set our environment to work in millimeters. One thing you're going to want is this little menu item, and you'll access it. You can see this little arrow right here where I have my mouse. If I click on that, it'll bring up this menu. You can also view that or hide it by pressing the N key on your keyboard. And do note at the lower left of this video, I do have a keyboard that will reflect all of the keyboard commands that I type throughout this tutorial when operating in Blender or the other programs that we're going to be using. So in order to set things to millimeters, the first thing that we need to do is to go over here to the scene properties. So it's this little icon that has kind of a cone and a circle and a dot. So we're going to click on that. Then we want to click on units. We want to make sure that it's set to metric. And then on the unit scale, I want you to type in 0.001. We'll hit enter there. And then under length, we're going to set this to millimeters. And that takes care of everything. And now you can see up here, everything is referenced in millimeters. Now, the one thing that we need to change at this point is our grid size, because our grid is still set way huge. So we're going to adjust that next. To change the grid settings, we'll come up here to this little icon that is kind of two intersecting circles. This toggles your overlays on and off. We'll click this down arrow button here. And what you need to do is first in the scale window, again, enter 0.001 and hit enter, and that will change your scale. You can click out of that. Now your grid is set to millimeters. One other thing that you may want to do here is on this View tab right here is change your endpoint. Just add a 0 here, and that'll just allow you to zoom out a little bit further, and you'll still be able to see your grid. Without that change, if we put that back to 1,000, what you'll see is pretty quickly everything just kind of disappears and it's easy to get lost. So again, we're just going to change that to 10,000 and that'll just give us a little more zoom. Probably isn't going to be that much of an issue for the small scale that we're working on, but again, just a recommendation. The next thing we're going to do is set things up for our particular project. This is where the fun begins. Now, I'm going to be making some earrings with that horse STL, and I'm going to start with a 40mm coin blank. So I just want to have something to kind of reference that size as I lay things out. Now, one of the things that you can do again with this gizmo is if you click on any of the X, Y, or Z axes, it will take you directly to that view. So I'm going to click on the Z axis here, and now we're basically, this is like a top-down view, and that's where we're going to do most of our work. So what we're going to do is come up here to add, and then I'm going to go curve and circle. Now, right down here on the bottom left of the screen, you see this kind of menu that pops up. And now sometimes it may just show up like this. And so a lot of times it's like you add this and you're not sure where it is, or you can't see these things, but this is where your initial settings of this circle, or we're going to be adding some stuff later on, and you want to make sure that you get a view of this because this is where you make your initial choices. So radius, now remember, my 40mm coin, that is a 40mm diameter coin, so I want half of that to be the radius. So I'm going to set a 20mm circle, and you can choose the location, X, Y, Z, and rotation, etc. This is fine. We want it right there in the center. So I'm going to hit that, and you can see now up on my screen, I have my circle, and that is a great start. Now, we've got that done. The next thing, now we can go ahead and get rid of this cube because we don't need that anymore. It was just an initial thing that was added. So there's a couple ways I can do this. I can just right click on it. You do want to make sure that you're in object mode and not in edit mode. And you probably shouldn't be in any other mode unless you accidentally, I think the tab key will switch your modes between object and edit. So we're going to make sure we're in object mode. I can left click on that, and if I just hit my delete key, it'll go ahead and delete that. And you'll see over here in my scene collection, the cube is now gone. Now that we have just these couple of things that we do want, we've got our 40mm circle. If you select item over here on this little menu, you can see my dimensions. So you can always verify that you got what you wanted. So I've got a 40mm circle. Still have my camera and my light, and we're going to deal with those a little bit later. But now let's take our object and import that. So I'm going to go File and then Import. And since I downloaded this horse STL, I'm going to go ahead and import that. So here's my horse STL. I will click that, and you'll immediately see that you get this kind of really large object. And the first thing we want to do is rotate it. So in my case, I believe I need to rotate my x-axis by 270 degrees. And so that looks good. And now I know that that is kind of a top-down view. And the next thing we need to do is scale this guy down because it's obviously a lot bigger than 40mm. So since it's selected, and you can tell it's selected because it has this orange border on it, I'm just going to hit the S key, and you'll see you get this little double-headed arrow. And then if you just move your mouse, you're able to scale this. And since I'm going to do 2 earrings, I want 2 to fit here inside this coin, I'm just going to kind of arbitrarily do this. Now, if you have some exact dimensions that you want, you can go ahead and put these in here. Now, if you can kind of screw things up, so it's probably better to use the scale, but we'll come back to that again a little bit later on. This is probably still a little bit large. We'll see as we lay these things out. The next thing we're going to do is move it. So it's already selected. We're still in object mode. I'm going to hit the move icon here. And this little blue square will allow you to just kind of freehand position it. Otherwise, you can use these arrows if you just want to move in one axis or another for more precise control. And if we change our axes, you also have one here kind of for the z-axis as well. But we're not going to mess with that too much yet. So I'm just going to kind of move it down here. And there's probably not enough room, so I'm going to make it just a little bit smaller. Not enough room yet for two. Okay, we have that going for us. Now we're going to add a ring so that I have somewhere to mount this horse head to. In my case, I'm making earrings. So the first thing I'm going to do is come over here to this little eyeball icon next to the horse, and I'm going to click that. And that's just going to hide our horse temporarily. Now I'm going to come up here to add. We're going, add mesh, and then we're going to choose torus. You'll see this box pop up here on the lower left, and again, it may just pop up like this, so hit this little arrow. And there's a couple things that we want to take a look at here. Now, I've already got my values set, so these are what we're going to add, but let me show you what these change. The first one is major segments, and this is going to change how smooth the outer and inner ring are. I'm going to choose 90 for this. And then the next one is minor segments, and that's going to choose how many facets comprise the surface of this torus. And again, you can see as I increase this number, it's going to make more facets and it'll just be smoother. So again, I'm just going to go ahead and enter 90 for that. Now we've got two other values that we're going to change, the major radius and the minor radius. And now I had to go and look these up because it's been a while since I've taken geometry. I'm most concerned with the outer diameter. I don't want this to be too big, but I also need the inside to be not too small because I need to put a jump ring or a hook or something through this. So our overall diameter equals 2 times the major radius plus the minor radius. So coming back here to Blender, those are the two values that we can choose. If eventually I'm gonna end up here with a 4 millimeter ring, which is just about right. So you can see here over my dimensions is 4 millimeters. So my major radius is the distance from the center to the center between the inner and outer rings. And then my minor radius is going to set how thick this ring is. And that is basically this distance where I have my mouse cursor right now from the center of the torus to the outside or inner rings. So again, our overall distance is a factor between the two of these. So if I just made this, say I want it to be 4 millimeters, and I say, well, the radius is half that, so I hit 2, you'll see now we actually end up with a 5 millimeter because we got to factor in that minor radius. So again, in this tutorial, I'm going to use 1.5 here and 0.5 for that. Now, one thing I want to tell you about Blender is when you add an object like this, the only time that you can make changes to this are when this initial box pops up. Once you click out of this, it is set. Now, if you don't do anything else, you can come up to edit and then, let's see, I think adjust last operation, and that will bring that back. But once I do anything else, if I move this torus, then that becomes my last operation, which is what we're going to do next. So make sure you set it. If you decide later that you want to adjust this thing, all you can do is basically scale it. You're not going to be able to change these particular parameters. So now that we have that done, I'm going to make sure that this is selected. I'm going to use my move icon, and we're just going to go ahead and move this out of the center because we're going to turn our horse head back on. So we're going to click that eyeball, and then I'm just going to position this in an area that I think will work well, and I think that's fine. So now we have a ring on our little horse head, and the next thing we're going to do is add some text. If you don't want to add any text and you're ready, you can kind of skip to the next part, but text is next. Now we're going to add some text. So again, just so you can see what's happening here, I'm going to go ahead and hide the horse. Then we're going to come up here and we're going to choose Add Text. and you'll see this text pop up here on the screen at the origin. Now, instead of worrying about what's happening down here, there are a couple things that we want to do. Now, so you can see if I click on this and try and type, nothing is going to happen. This is one of those times that I do need to change into edit mode. So you can either come up here and change this from object mode to edit mode, or you can hit the tab key on your keyboard, and you can see that switches us between object mode and edit mode. When I'm in edit mode, I have a cursor. So now I can use my keyboard and I'm just going to type the text that I want to eventually be included in my final design. So this is the text that I'm going to use, and you can go ahead now and switch back to object mode. Now there are a couple things, the main area that we apply changes to our text is over here in the properties area of the workspace. So over here on the right hand side of your screen, you want to click on this data, the little A icon, object data properties. So here we have our text, which is selected, and there's a couple things that we want to take a look at. The first one is going to be font. So if I click on this down arrow or this expand arrow for font, we can change the actual font that is being used here. Now, if you click on this F for font, you may only have a couple that are available there. But if you click on this folder icon, it will bring up a window that you can choose your font. Now, most of your fonts, if you're on Windows, sorry, I'm not a Mac guy, you probably know where your fonts are. So you can navigate to that folder if you need to, but see Windows Fonts is one of the spaces that Windows Fonts are located. So you can go ahead and choose a font that appeals to you out of what you have. You probably don't want anything that's got super thin lines in it. Again, because if this is really small, this engraving, the text is probably going to be less than 1 millimeter. So really fine lines may be problematic. So I think this one might work for me. So I'm just going to choose that and open the font. Now, a couple other things that we can change here. We've got our font selected. Then if we come here to geometry, the first one we want to change is the extrusion. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to flip my axes here to Y, and let me hide that ring or the torus there. You can see that my text is basically just a kind of an outline shape. It really doesn't have a whole lot of depth to it, which isn't overly important, but I'm going to go ahead and extrude this. We're going to do 1/10 of a millimeter. Now we'll come back up here, and our text now has a little bit of a depth. Now there are some other things that you can change in here. You can play around with bevel. You have some choices here on bevel, so you can bevel this. I think in my example, this text is going to be so small that if I did do anything with bevel, it's not going to show up in the text. And then you also have some spacing options over here under paragraph. You can, if you want more space between your letters, etc., you can change that. I'm just going to leave that alone to 1, and that looks good. Now, once I have that done, the next step is going to actually be to move this into place. So again, I'm going to zoom out, make sure that I have this selected, use my move tool. I'm going to move this out of the way, and then let me move it out of the way a little bit more. I'm going to go ahead and turn my horse back on, and now I want to get this into position where I actually want it. Now, right now it's way too small, so I'm going to hit S for scale. And just like we did before with our horse icon, I can move that into position, and you'll see that it's actually, I'm just seeing the outline, because right now the z-axis of my text is at 0, and I actually need that to be above the horse if I want that to show up. So what I'm going to do is change my axis location, or my axis view, and then I'm just going to pull this blue arrow and I'm going to change the height, and now it is above the horse. So, and I can turn my torus back on, and now we pretty much have the finished model. Now there's a couple other steps that we need to do. We're going to make 2 of these, and then we will set things up to create the depth map. Now we're going to duplicate this. So in my case, I want to make a pair of earrings. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to left click on the horse, and you can see it's now outlined there. And then I'm going to hold down the shift button, and again on your screen on the little keyboard insert you can see that I am pressing the shift key, and now I'm going to click on the torus. With both of those selected, and you can see they have different shades of orange around them, I am now going to hit Control C and then Control V, and that is on Windows. I guess Mac is maybe Command C, Command V. Again, not a Mac guy. And then I'm just going to move this, and I am moving the new copies of these items. Now, again, for my case, I don't want identical items here. I want to have these earrings slightly different. So what I'm going to do, you can only do this to one object at a time, even if you have multiples selected. It won't do them both. So all I care about is the horse. So in this case, with the horse selected, I'm going to come up here to rotation. I'm going to hit 180 on the Y, and that's going to flip my horse around. And because of the way this horse is modeled, you can see it's actually different on this side. He's kind of got this bangs are sweeping over to this side, but on this side it's a little bit different. So that's just going to give a little bit of unique characteristics. And you can see just because of the way this is flipped, my ring is now probably slightly more forward on this one. So I'm gonna move that back just a little bit here. Now, you may be asking why I didn't select everything when I did my copy and paste. Well, if I would have done this to my letters, well, actually, it probably wouldn't have made a difference because I wouldn't have been able to flip them. But at this point, now I can copy and paste my letters or my text and then position that. And now I've got 2 copies of everything. Now, the next thing I need to do in my particular instance is set this all up for my final depth map, and we're going to set up our cameras here shortly. Oops, let me make sure I get everything selected here. So I want my horse, my torus, and my text, and then we're just going to move this over to the side a little bit, and I'm mostly concerned with where it lines on the x-axis, and I'll tell you why here in a minute. And now I'll select all of these and move that over. Now, before we set up our camera to create our depth map, we want to make sure that everything is basically symmetrical, because if we have any differences, especially in depth, these are going to be different. So what I'm going to do now very quickly is I'm just going to go through, and by using the dimensions and the information that I have here in the item, I'm going to make sure that everything is basically symmetrical with kind of along the x-axis here. So starting with my horse, I can see that this guy is at about 8.7. So I'm just going to make that negative 8.7. That's going to shift him over a little bit, and then this one will make positive 8.7. And again, this isn't critical with the exception of depth, but it's just me being a little bit anal retentive, I guess. So we see this is at negative 8.9 and 11. We're going to make this one 8.9 and 11. And you can see both of these, our Z is at 0, which is great. So now they're fairly symmetrical. My horse, 8.9. My Y is slightly different. Looks like we'll go 0.05 on that one. And Z is 0, so 0.05. There we go. And then our text. Now here's where things do get important. So I'm going to flip my view on my text really quick. And the position of our text in this particular instance, the thing that is the highest in the z-axis is going to end up with the brightest level and will engrave at the surface of the coin. If I put this way up here, it's going to make that's top surface of the coin, it's going to start engraving this much deeper, which I don't want. But if I put it down here, this will be the highest position, and then my text will be lower. And in my case, that means that polishing won't be as easy. So what I want to do is I'm just going to put my text right about the same level as the highest position here. And we can see that z-axis is 4.45. So we'll just make that an even 4.45. And then this guy, we're also going to set at 4.45. And now I can come back to the overview. And these are not, we do want probably the y value to be the same. So it looks like it's pretty darn close to 11. So we're just going to make this negative 11. And we'll make this one negative 11 as well. And then the x is going to be different between the two just because of the way that they're positioned in the horse. So as long as I like them where they're at, that is fine. So we now have everything set. And the next step is to set up the camera for creating our depth map. Now we're going to set up the camera. And I want to give credit where credit is due. So I learned a lot of this from this video here, Art by AdRock. And initially I thought I'm just going to link to this video, but I found that there have been some changes in Blender since this video was created. So some of the things that he recommends to do in this video or instructs you to do, the menus have changed or the settings have changed, so it doesn't translate anymore. So I've taken bits and pieces of this, but I do recommend that you go check out this video and his channel. So let's go back to Blender. Now, we're going to select our camera. This is the little camera icon. It's been floating around here since we started, and you can either click on the camera icon or you can come over here to your collection, your scene collection menu over here, and you can just select camera. We want to change first the location. So you can either type 0 in all of these one by one, or you can just left click and drag and then click 0, and that'll basically set them all the same. So now we have our camera at the origin. We also need to do the same to the rotation because we want this camera facing straight down to kind of give us a bird's eye view. Now, right now, our camera is right at the origin. We need it to be above our model. So we're just going to use the move tool and we're going to move our camera above our models. Now, this is what we have. If you click this little icon underneath your navigation gizmo that looks like a movie camera, if you click on that, it's going to show you what the camera is currently viewing. If we were to make our depth map now, we would have this view of 2 horse nostrils, which is not what we want. So we need to do some additional settings for the camera. Now that we have our camera positioned, there are a few settings that we need to change. The first is going to be under the output icon. So right over here in your properties panel, there's this little icon. It looks like a printer printing out a picture. You're going to click on the output and then you want to click on format. So if this is not expanded, click on this little arrow. And we want to change both the X and Y resolution. And we're going to do 2048. That's just values that I like to use here. So I'm going to make X and Y 2048, and that will change basically the shape of our camera sensor, if you will. Now, the next thing that we need to do is also under this output section. We just entered these values under format. So now we're going to come down here to output. So in this output section, you want to make sure that your color depth is set to 16 bits because we want to have a 16-bit PNG. So do make sure that your file format is also set to PNG, which it should be already. And then we want to change the compression. We don't want any compression. So you can either enter 0 there, or you can just click in this box and then drag your mouse and that will allow you to change it. But we want that to be set to 0. Now, a couple other settings that we want to do. Over here, again, we want to check the view layer. So we've got this little icon. It looks like a stack of photos. And under passes and then data, we want combined, and we need to also check depth. Depth is going to be very important because we're going to use that to create our depth map. Now, you want to make sure that your camera is still selected. So over here in your view, I'm going to actually change our view a little bit so that we can kind of see what's going on here. There is our camera. So our camera is selected. You can either click on it in your viewport, or you can come up here and click camera. And when that's selected, you will see this little data properties for the camera. If you don't have the camera selected, if I click on my horse, you'll see that camera icon disappear. So again, with the camera selected, we're going to click on the camera. Now there's a number of things that we need to change in here. The first thing we need to do is right here under lens, and we are going to expand lens, and we're going to change the type from perspective to orthographic. And you'll see that our box shape here has changed. We now have this large square. Next thing we need to do is you want to come up here in your viewport window and again click on this camera icon. This toggles the camera view, and like I showed you before, this shows us exactly what the camera is seeing. So we're seeing a little bit more of our horse heads, but we don't have it all. So what I need to do is come over here to this orthographic scale, and I'm just going to click and hold down my mouse button and then slide left or right. And in this case, I want to slide to the right until I have my entire view in the frame here. So in this orange camera view frame, I want to make sure that I have the entire view of my media. In this case, we created that circle, which is going to be my coin blank. And so I want to make sure that I can see that whole thing. Once I can see the entire thing, I'm going to let my mouse button go. And the value that you have here really depends on a lot of the way that you set things, especially the height that you set your camera at. Now you can see in my case, I went and I set it to 15 millimeters, and it's again kind of arbitrary, but this value may be different for you depending on how you have things set. Now, let's see, we're going to zoom back in here a little bit. There's two more things that we need to set, and they are both still here under the camera properties over here in our properties window. The first is going to be the clip start, and we're just going to make that 0, and you'll see that it automatically changes to 0. There's 5 zeros and a 1. It just automatically does that. But this next value is the most critical value that we're going to set for this depth map. And what this is the end value. So what I want you to do is click into this window with your mouse and hold the mouse button down and then slide it all the way to the left, and you'll see everything disappears. And then slowly we're going to start moving back to the right, and things will start coming back into view. And what you'll notice is the things that are closest to the camera. So remember when we positioned the text, I wanted that to be about the same height as the highest portion of the horse. So everything's going to come back into view, and you keep sliding slowly until we see that circle come back. That one right there, not the ring, but the circle that is our boundary, because we put that at 0. And now we've got everything is in view of the camera, and this will make sure that you get a very good depth map. If you set your camera too high and then you set this value too high, basically what happens is you end up with like everything kind of just being kind of white and maybe bright gray, but you don't really get any blacks because it's not looking down far enough to the bottom, or there's just too much of a difference and you're not going to get a really good depth map. So this value right here, this end value, is very critical. Now the last thing we're going to do at this point before we go into the compositing setup is we can test our camera just to make sure that things are looking good. And if we come up here to the render, which is up here at the top of your toolbar or your menu items, next here to file, edit, and then you'll see render and then render image. If you click on that, you will see a rendering of your image. Now don't worry about what this looks like. This is based on basically the light that we have in the setup here, but we're not going to be using any actual or simulated light values. We are actually going to be using the depth information of these 3D models to create our depth map. So we just care that everything seems to be in view, nothing's getting cut off. So now we are ready to move on to the compositing stage where we will create our depth map. All right, now buckle up, folks. We are going to make some magic here. This is the compositing setup. So at the top of your screen here, you will see the compositing tab. We want to click on that. in the top of the compositing window, you have this new button. I want you to click on that, and it's going to bring up a couple of things. You will see this render layers node, a group output node, and a viewer node. Now, yours may have brought up a image in the background. If you have been following along and you haven't shut anything down, since we did render the image, that pops up. So I'm going to go up here and hit that really quick, render that image, and now you'll see that appears here in the background. I just didn't want that to throw you off. Now there's a couple things that we need to do to get things changed over to actually create a depth map. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come up to add here, and then I'm going to come down to utilities, and then I'm going to hit normalize, and that brings this normalize node in. And you can see here, you can just move it around freely. Now, if I bring it to where this yellow line is, if I just pop it on top of this line, you can see how that line changes from white to yellow. That means it's going to automatically make the connection. So if I just click my mouse again, you can see now we have applied the normalize. And that just basically kind of changes the value settings. We won't go into all the technical reasons. Just know that you need it. So we have that in, and the next thing we need to do is we're going to change this. Right now we have the image is being rendered. We want to actually use depth. So I'm going to click this little node button here, move that, and then just drag it from value, from the normalized box to depth. You can do it either way. It doesn't really matter the way that you do it. If you click on something and then drag, you make your little wire connections there. So now we are using depth information, and this is true depth because this is a 3D model. It has X, Y, and Z coordinates. So this isn't like where you're taking AI and trying to, predict a depth or guess a depth. These are actual depth values that are being used here. And so that's why it's really going to make great depth maps for us. Now, there's a couple other things that we need to do. We have an actual depth map here, but it is backwards. This would not result in a good engraving. So next we're going to come up here again to add, and then color, and then invert color. So we're going to grab that, and we're going to drag that right here, and it kind of pushes everything out of the way. And now we are almost done with our depth map. So you can see all these nodes here, and you can move these around as you want. As long as you don't break anything, you'll be fine. Now we have all of that done. There are a few things that we need to do before we can export this and use it. First, in the properties panel, so over here to the right of the viewport, I want you to click on the render icon, and that is this icon right here. It looks like the back of a digital camera. We're going to scroll all the way down here to color management. We're going to change the display from sRGB to display P3. And then our view, we want that to actually be raw. And you'll see that the change. I'm going to go back. I think it was set to AGX. And we're going to change that, like I said before, from whatever it's set to, we want to set that to raw so we get our raw value. And now see how much detail or variation that we have in the color with all of these settings. I'm actually going to delete that node there. It automatically puts that in there, but you don't necessarily need it, and it kind of makes things a little bit difficult. So now I can kind of get these things out of the way so that you can see what's going on. Now the size of this image, again, when we set things up originally, let's see, was it in? Yeah, this output. If we change this, I believe it will change the size of this back here, but I wouldn't recommend necessarily doing that unless you need to make those smaller. But for our final output, you do want to have that at a relatively large value so that you're not ending up with compression and things like that. So we now have our image, and oops, that should have been there. So now you have a complete depth map. If you are only making coins, then you could use this depth map and then just go straight to LightBurn. So Some of the next few things, aside from saving the images, if that's all you're interested in and you don't need the extra steps to cut these things out of a coin or a brass blank or something like that, then like I said, you can skip right ahead to LightBurn. But now that we have our depth map rendered and everything is set properly, we can come up here to render image. And again, we have that. And then you can go image, save as, and then just wherever you want to save it for your final output, you just save it. And again, you want to make sure this is set to PNG because that is very important. So I'm just going to name this horse earrings and got it in my jewelry folder. So I'm going to save that image. And again, you can see all the properties that are up here. It is an image. It's PNG format. We're in RGBA and 16 bits with no compression like we said before. So I'm going to go ahead and save that, and then we'll move on to the next step. Now we're going to reconfigure a few things to generate a mask that will be useful to cut these items out once we're in LightBurn. So we're still here in the compositing view. We're going to add a couple new nodes. First, we're going to choose Add, Color, and then Alpha Over. So we're going to take this and place this new Alpha Over node here. And then we're going to connect the alpha output to the foreground of the alpha over node. Now we're going to add one more node, which is going to be add, and then utilities, and then switch. So we're going to place this right here. Now we'll connect the output of the alpha image, the image node, to the on of our switch. And we can move this over here, and we are going to take this node from the invert color and move that to the off. So let me reposition these a little bit, and then we will connect the image, the output of the switch. So image to image. So this is kind of what our new node pattern looks like. And I'm going to clean this up a little bit just so it makes a little more sense. So give me a moment. And there we have it. Now you can see how everything is connected, and I'll probably make a screenshot of this and put this in the written text notes. So for those of you that like to follow along a little more, have a visual reference or something that you can read. Now, moving right along, there's one more thing that we need to do. And so we're going to come over here to the Properties panel, and we want to choose the Render section. So again, the render icon looks like the back of a digital camera. So we're going to click on that, and then we are going to find Film. So right here, we're going to click on Film, and then right under this filter size box, you can see where it says transparent. So we're going to click on that. Now, what our switch has done is it allows us to turn this on and off so that we can make the mask. Unfortunately, you have to use this transparent checkbox at the same time. So we're going to click on Switch, turn our switch on, and then we're going to go to render our image. So we're going to come up here to render image, or you can hit F12 on your keyboard. We're going to render the image, and now what you see is we get this pure black and white image, and that we're going to use for our mask in LightBurn to create a vector to cut out these shapes. So again, we're going to save as. So we're going to save this, and I'm going to name it. You want to use a name that you can tell the difference between the two. So obviously that one is our earrings. So I'm going to call this horse earrings mask, and I'm going to save that. And we'll click Save Image, and now we are done. You do want to make sure that transparent is checked when you're making your mask, and it doesn't seem to matter when you're doing your depth mask. So we are now done in Blender. It is time to move on to LightBurn. But don't forget to save your file because you just made a bunch of cool changes to it. Now, one thing that you may want to do and something that I have done in the past. Let's save this, and we'll just call this, yeah, we'll save it as it was. But what you can do is you can come back into our layout menu, and let's just save this again, and we'll just call this, blank template 40 millimeter round. All right, so we'll save that, and then we'll go ahead and we'll get rid of all of our elements. And now we just have, turn off our camera view. Now you have, I'll save this again. And now you have something that you can come straight away. So you have a great starting point. Everything is already set for you. So you could bring in a new 3D model. You could make a new creation. All of your compositing is already done. Again, if I go and render my image, it's going to just be blank at this point because I don't have anything there. So, but you've already got everything set up, and so your layout is set, and now you have a fresh place to start, and you won't have to go through all of these steps again. All right, the first thing that we're going to do at this point is go ahead and import our depth map. Now you will note in this example, I will be using a different depth map and map than what we created in Blender, just because I've already cut out those earrings and I've got a few revisions to make. So we're going to open this depth map, and you'll see that it zooms way, it's a big image, so it's going to take a lot of space. First thing you want to do is make sure that it is also centered. So we're going to move that to page center. And then I want you to note, I'm going to hold down the control key, grab a corner here, and then click on my mouse and drag it down. And be careful as you drag, because sometimes it'll flip. And we're just going to drag that. What you can do here is if you click on output for that, that will make it transparent. And then you can go ahead and position this in your coin just to make sure that it's going to fit and in the size that you want. So we're going to go with, I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. And just because I've done this a couple times, I've got my lock set here, and I'm going to just make this 36.97. That's kind of an arbitrary number, I know, but, and okay, that looks good. It's kind of right here on the edge of my purple boundary. Now, the next step is I'm going to basically repeat that process with my mask. So again, File, Import, grab my mask, and at this point, this is a good tip for you, so that you can keep these two separate. Before I do anything with this, I'm going to just change the layer for this one to, it doesn't really matter what you do. We're going to make some adjustments a little later on. But since we already know the size and position, I'm going to go ahead and make sure that this is moved to page center. And that's going to put it at, in my case, with all of my settings, because I'm using that 110 lens, it's going to be X and Y 55. And then I'm just going to set my width to 36.97. The important thing is that this is the exact same size as the depth map that we just used. Okay, so now we have these two here done. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take this mask image, we're going to come up here to Tools, Trace Image, and you shouldn't have to do any kind of changes to the cutoff threshold or anything, because this is just a black and white image. It's very easy for LightBurn to trace this. So we're going to click OK. And at this point, you can go ahead and turn off the layer that has that depth map, or excuse me, that has the mask. And you can see now we have this vector, this red line is now a vector. So what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to go ahead and turn off my depth map as well, so we can just see the vector that we created. With that selected, I want to make sure that I've, with all that turned off, I want to select that new vector, and then I'm going to hit Control and U to ungroup that, or you can right click and choose ungroup. It's grayed out because I just performed that command. And now we can address these two shapes separately. So I'm going to just go ahead and select this outer square and delete that because we do not need it. Now we're going to do a couple of things here. First, we want to select the outermost shapes. So in this case, the horse shape. And I'm going to select that one on the left, and then I'm going to hold down the shift key and I'm going to select this one on the right. And at this point, we don't want to deal with this inner ring yet. We'll get that in a minute. And we're going to come over here to the Offset Shapes button, click that. And I'm going to change this to 0.1 millimeters. And we're going to go outward. And so now what we're doing is we're just creating a basically a little shell that we're going to use for our final cutout. And we've got that done. And now we're going to do the same thing with these inner shapes, but we're going to go the opposite direction. So first thing, we're going to select both of these. We're going to go to Offset Shapes. And then this time, instead of outward, we're going to go inward because we want, we want to go inward in this case. We'll just leave it at that. All right. So we've got those new vectors created. And then before we move along, we're going to do a couple more things. These outermost vectors that we just created. So again, you can select those and they're separate because we haven't grouped anything together. I want you to go ahead and make sure both of those are selected. Hit Control C to copy, and then you're going to hit Alt or hold down Alt and hit V. And what that does is it pastes that new vector right in place. So it's right over the line that you just created. And at this point, we're going to go ahead and choose another layer color. So we'll make that its own separate vector. And if I turn off this red outline, you can see this is the new vector that we just created. And this is going to be a single line cut, also used to cut out this shape when we're all done. And now we're going to turn that back on, and we're going to do the exact same thing for these inner circles. So we're going to hit Control C and then Alt V, and then we will also make those pink. And this is what you should end up with. So like I said, that's going to be a single line cut that we can use to cut this shape out if it doesn't fall out of the brass blank, which it probably won't just from the 3D pass. So I'm going to turn those off for now. So we have our outline there. And the next thing we want to do is we're going to make one more vector, kind of a sacrificial. This is going to be our image crop vector. So we're going to, and all we want in this one is we just want that outline, the outermost outline. We're not going to do anything with these inner circles at this point. So again, I'm going to Control C, Alt V to copy that. And we're going to make this its own color. Make sure I don't pick a layer I've already used. And now I'm going to go ahead and turn off the red so you can just see what we have there. So we want to make sure that this remains selected. And you can see it's just selected. We got these little marching ants, as Photoshop users will know and be familiar with. And we're going to go ahead and turn on our depth map again. And then I'm going to hold down the Shift key, select my depth map. And at this point, if you right click, you should have crop image. If you don't see crop image, it's because you don't have a single vector selected. If you have multiple vectors and they're not grouped together, the crop image won't show up. But once you have that, you can just hit crop image, and this is what we end up with. Now we have this is basically what we're going to use for our 3D slice. So we've got kind of the outline of the horse. We've put 1/10 of a millimeter along the outside that is pure black. So that'll help us go as deep as we possibly can. And then we have these other two vectors that we just created a little bit ago. I'm going to turn this one on. Now at this point, we want to make the red one. I'm going to turn off my depth map here. We're going to change this red one to fill because of the way that we're going to utilize that. And then, of course, we still have this pink one, which would be our final cut. So, all right, at this point, I'm going to turn all of these back on and we will address them. Oops, with the exception of we no longer need this layer here that that was our mask. But I found if you delete that, it tends to delete the vectors that were created from it. So just go ahead and hide that and not use it. So I'm going to turn on my depth map. And now we're going to go through and we're going to set everything. So we will start with our cut settings. So again, I'm going to turn these off. My cut settings, so this one here, my layer 02, the red layer, I am going to come to my library, and these are settings that I use all the time, except we're going to do brass, coin, and my outline final cut. I'm going to assign that to this layer, and let's take a look at what we have here. So my speed is 2000, max power is 80%, the mode is fill, frequency is 185 hertz, Q pulse is 300 nanoseconds, and 1 pass, or global pass. Line interval 0.08, lines per inch 317.5, scan angle is 45 degrees, 15 passes. Now, you may want to bump this up, and essentially when you get everything done, when you finished your 3D, your depth, your 3D slice, basically if you need to do some additional cuts, I basically go back and forth. We'll talk about more of that later. But right now this is set to 15 passes. I do have a 25-degree angle increment, and I do have wobble enabled. And if you've messed with this enough and you know that it's better to turn that off, then go for it. But this is what's been working for me. So those are my settings there. You can see it is just one operation in this. And now we'll go ahead and turn that one off. Let me turn on. We've got my pink line here. Like I said, that is going to be a single line cut. I've got this saved as slow line cut. So I want to make sure that my pink layer is selected, and I'm going to assign that. And we'll take a look at these settings. Speed is 55, max power is 80, frequency is 47, Q pulse is 200. And I basically got these. This is the parameters, at least Q pulse and frequency, where my laser gives the most power. Again, I've got this set for 15 passes, and I do have wobble enabled, and you can see the values there. So those are the settings for our final cut. And at this point, I'm going to hide both of these and turn them off because we won't run this the first time we send this job to the laser. I'm going to turn back on my depth map, and we're going to go ahead and assign parameters to that layer. And these are the settings that I use for all of my brass coins, at least this diameter and depth of coin. So I'm going to assign that, and we can take a look at those settings, and we'll talk about both of the layers here, or jobs. There are two different things that will happen with this particular layer. So the first one, speed is 2000, max power is 80%. This one, the frequency is 100, Q pulse is 200. My line interval is 0.0282 or 900 dpi. My scan angle is set to 45 degrees. This is very important. It is 3D sliced. This is what is going to give you the depth into that coin and end up with a 2.5D object. So make sure that you have 3D sliced. We are not using pass through, and enable cleanup is where that second layer comes from. If you don't have that, you won't be able to make this second layer if you don't enable cleanup. So make sure you check enable cleanup. And then I do have an angle increment here. So that is also very important. If you don't have an angle increment, it basically does this scan angle every single time. And what you do, you kind of end up, if there's any, the slightest bit of error in anything, you're just basically stacking these engraving lines on top of each other. And you'll see these kind of lines in your engraving when you're all done. But if you put this angle increment in there, every time it does these multiple passes, it's going to shift it by just a little bit. So you end up with a nice or a smoother output. Now, number of passes for this, because we want extra depth, we're going to change that to 512. And I'm going to briefly explain what we're doing here. When you make a depth map, and we've made that PNG file, it's basically assigning between 0 and 256 levels of, with one, whether it's 0 or 256. One of them is pure white, the other one is pure black. And everything in between that is some level of gray. So you've got 256 values of gray that LightBurn is going to assign, and each one of those different values is going to create a layer from the top to the bottom. If you do 256 slices, every one of those values gets one pass from the laser. If you double it and go to 512, each one of those values gets two passes. So it basically makes a little bit more depth. You're taking out more material. And then you can see the rest of my settings here. And now let's switch over to this cleanup, and you'll see the values are slightly different. My speed is 3000, my max power is 20, frequency is 100, Q pulse is 200, and line interval is the same, 0.282. Lines per inch, 900. Scan angle is 0. In every 4 passes, cleanup number after passes is 4. So after every 4 normal passes, it's going to do one of these cleanup layers. And then again, this one, the angle increment is different. It's 22 degrees. And every time it does a cleanup layer, it's going to shift by 22 degrees. Make sure that auto rotate is clicked. If you do clean whole image, it'll basically blast the entire area. If you don't check this, like I have, and I'd recommend that you don't, it basically follows the layer. So when the fiber laser stops, engraving a point, like in this case, it's one of the first things that you see it engrave is going to be this S, or in the case of the one that I actually videoed, it's going to be the other one that we used in Blender. So it's the river. So you'll start to see that text appear first. When the laser stops carving out these letters, because they're at the top, the cleanup pass won't hit them either. So it's not continuing to, etch these or engrave these away. So it's going to give you a little bit crisper results. So those are the settings there. And at this point, we are basically ready to send this to the laser. Now, let me give you some final tips. So I've got this, and I'm going to go ahead and let's save this. Horse earrings. So you want to make sure that you save your work. We're going to send this to the laser, and it's going to do those 512 passes, and it's just going to engrave out the horse. Now, if we get lucky, which probably isn't going to happen, I have had some designs like this actually just at the end of the 512 passes, they were laying on the bottom. They have fallen out of the coin blank. But if that doesn't happen, and it probably won't, then what you can do is just turn off your depth map, and then we're going to come in and we can start with this outline. And again, remember, this is only 1/10 of a millimeter thick, but it is in fill mode. So you're going to have, if we run, let's see, if we do this little kind of simulation, you can see how it's basically going to scan across there many times, or at least 15 times in this case. And so it's just doing that outline. And the reason that we make that little, thin width is because if you just use the width of the laser beam, especially with brass, it heats up very quickly and then it cools very quickly, and it may not ablate. And so you're just basically melting it, and then it solidifies back in place. And so having that small area there sometimes helps cut it out. So if you need to cut it out, what I'd recommend, if you can try just, run one of these one time at 15, and then do the next one, this single line, and do that 15 times. If that doesn't work, then come back and then just change this make it 100. Let it just sit there. It'll only take a couple of minutes, and then you'll be able to hopefully gauge, how far you're going. And you'll see in my example, when we go to the laser, I actually have a jig where I can see underneath the coin. So I basically just repeat these last 2 stages over. I'll turn this one off and then turn this one on. and run that a number of times until I have everything completely cut out. All right, we are here at the fiber laser. Like I mentioned before, we are going to be using my Tian 80 watt JPT fiber laser. And as we scroll down here, we can see the setup that we've got going on. And this is just a little trick. If you put your finger above your framing, you can see if you're right on that line or not. It helps you get positioning. And I would highly recommend, if you don't already have one of these XY tables, I got this when I bought my laser from Tian, and they do have these available on the website. I'll put all those links down in the bottom below, as well as some of the other items I use for this. But let's get this going. Let me turn off just the outside, and now you can see my little horse outline, and that's what we created with all those vectors. So let me get everything fired up and we'll get this started. All right, we do have this fiber laser enclosed here in my Tico laser enclosure, and we are ready to go. Now I can tell you that when I do coins, a full coin, it normally takes about an hour and 45 minutes if I'm just doing a 256 passes. But with this, since I'm not doing the entire coin, but I am doing 512 lasers, I think it should be over 2 hours, but I'm hoping maybe a little less than 3. We shall see how it goes. And there you can see that cleanup pass. That keeps everything looking nice and clean. All right, the 3D slice pass has completed, and it looks like nothing has cut out all the way through. Let me change views and I will kind of show you the bottom side of this. Here with this jig, you can see I'm just using a little dental mirror, and I can take a look at the bottom to see when we've passed all the way through. So I'm just going to use those outlines that we created in the prior step. So I'm going to alternate the red and pink layers there, and I'll just bump up the passes. I'll move it from 15. I'll make it like 50 and just alternate between those two until everything's cut out. I've run the outline and the slow line cut pass several times. I just upped the number to like 50 passes and just ran it a number of times. But anyway, let's see if we can get a view here on the mirror. I think you can see that. It is almost cut all the way through, and I could keep going on and on and on, but you may be able to see it's kind of down here at the bottom area. So you can see down there at the bottom, it is almost completely cut out, but it seems like we've got a little bit of a problem area. So I'm actually going to use this as an opportunity to show you one trick to get past this. So we're going to go ahead and take the coin out of that jig and move it to another step. All right, here we have the coin out, and again, you can see just how close we are to this fully cutting out. And I can't, it's not loose enough for me to just press it on through. So let me show you another trick. All right, so to do this trick, if you will, you want a nice flat surface. This is my kitchen countertop. It's a granite countertop, so it's relatively flat. I'm just gonna move this over so I'm not using the center of this piece of sandpaper. This is just 220 grit sandpaper. So basically I'm gonna just take off a little bit of brass on the back side. And what we are doing here, as you can see, is we are removing this layer, and all we got to do is get to where it is. We're going to remove enough material so these will fall out. All right, and you can see here with probably less than a minute worth of sanding, I can now push that one out. All right, just a couple more minutes of sanding on this side. And I think we are, there we go. That guy is done. So here we have our two finished pieces. We're going to throw these in the pin tumbler and then we'll polish them. So here again are our little earrings before tumbling. So I've got my Vivor magnetic tumbler and I'm going to drop those in there, and then I've got this burnishing compound that I am going to pour in here. This is Shine Bright. It's a mixture, and I'll just scientifically pour a little amount in there, throw in the lid. We're going to run this for about half an hour, and then we'll see what we have when we're done. Here they are right out of the pin tumbler. So now we will go ahead and polish these up and then turn them into earrings. And now we'll just spend a couple minutes on the buffing wheels here and we'll get these things nice and shiny. I did want to take just a minute to talk about some differences here. Now, in the video example that we just did, the earrings here we did at 512 passes, but what I wanted to show you is a small difference. We're going to move those out of the way because those were both done exactly the same. These two items here, these pendants, done using the exact same method. The heart was an STL, and I put the horse was an STL above that, and then the text there as well. But these two were engraved slightly differently. So hopefully this remains in focus. This one was done at 512 passes, and if I hold them hopefully next to each other, you can get a sense for the difference in thickness, and that is because the engraving on this one is much shallower at only 256 passes. Now the text was also much closer to the heart, so there's a little bit of a difference there, but whereas this one, the text was much higher, and so you can see how much more raised that text is. 256 passes left us with this much brass afterward that we had to cut through, whereas 512 left us this much. So that is one of the differences that you'll get based on the number of passes that you do with your fiber laser. All right, isn't that just amazing? The things that we can do with the technology that we have available now. I have loved every minute of owning my Tian laser and the amount of things that I've created, and honestly, the money that I've made. That was not a cheap machine, but I have paid for it at least once with just the various jewelry projects that I have made. No kidding. So if you need a fiber laser, I would highly recommend checking out Tian. They have great products, and even better, they have exceptional service. So let me know down in the comments if you have any follow-up questions. I would really appreciate it if you would take a moment to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so, and hit the notification bell so you know when I drop new videos. We're going to be doing a lot more how-to stuff coming up in 2026, so stay tuned. As always, I enjoy the time that we get to spend together here on the channel. Let's keep on learning, burning, printing, and engraving together. Wait, learning. I think learning's in there somewhere. Take care, everyone.